My name is Sarah, and I'm 29 years old. If you were to ask my parents about me today, they'd probably paint a picture of someone who's changed, someone who's become cold and distant from the family that raised her. But that's not the whole story, not even close. The truth is far more complicated, woven through years of subtle manipulation, unspoken expectations, and a kind of emotional labor that nobody ever acknowledged. I'm sharing this story because I know there are others out there who've walked this same path, who've struggled with the weight of being the responsible one, the fixer, the eternal safety net for family members who never seem to learn how to catch themselves. Growing up, I was what you might call the golden child, though not in the way most people think of it. I wasn't showered with praise or given special treatment. Instead, I was the one who figured things out on her own, who never asked for help, who made good grades and got a decent job and paid her bills on time. And somehow, that independence, that self-sufficiency that I'd worked so hard to build, became the very thing that trapped me. Because in my family's eyes, if Sarah could handle everything so well on her own, then surely she could handle a little bit more. Just this once, just to help out. My older sister Rebecca is 32 now, though you'd never guess it from the way she lives her life. Where I learned early on that actions have consequences, that bills need to be paid and responsibilities need to be met. Rebecca seemed to float through life on a cloud of other people's goodwill and second chances. She's beautiful, I'll give her that, with the kind of charisma that makes people want to help her, want to believe her stories about why this job didn't work out or why that roommate was impossible to live with. She has this way of telling her tales that makes you feel like you're the only person who truly understands her, who can see past all the bad luck and unfortunate circumstances to the wonderful person underneath. For years, I watched this pattern play out. Rebecca would get a new job, usually something in retail or hospitality, and for the first few weeks, she'd be full of enthusiasm. She'd talk about her plans for advancement, about how this was finally the opportunity she'd been waiting for. Then, inevitably, something would go wrong. Her manager would be unreasonable, her coworkers would be jealous of her, the hours would be impossible, the commute would be too long. There was always something, always a reason why it wasn't her fault that another job had slipped through her fingers. And each time, our parents would nod sympathetically, would agree that, yes, it was terrible how unlucky she was, how unfair the world could be. They'd open their doors again, let her move back into her childhood bedroom, and the cycle would begin anew. But it wasn't just about providing a roof over her head. There was always more. Could I lend her money for a car repair? Could I co-sign on an apartment lease? Could I put in a good word at my company? The request she was, but every boundary you try to set is seen as selfishness. Every time you protect your own interests, you're accused of not caring about family. I remember Rebecca herself had just looked at me with those big eyes of hers, tears threatening to spill over, and asked how I could be so heartless when all she needed was a chance to prove herself. But I had given her chances, so many chances. And each one had ended the same way, with me out thousands of dollars and Rebecca moving on to the next scheme, the next dream, the next reason why she needed just a little more help. The jewelry business, predictably, never materialized. The money disappeared into whatever black hole swallowed all of Rebecca's good intentions. And within weeks, she was back to complaining about how impossible it was to succeed in this economy, how rigged the system was against people like her. What people like her meant, I never quite understood. People who didn't follow through on their commitments, people who expected others to fund their lifestyle, people who had never held a job for longer than 6 months. But I kept these thoughts to myself, pushing them down deep where they could fester quietly, because voicing them would only lead to more family drama, more accusations of me being unsupportive and cruel. The apartment I lived in became my sanctuary. It wasn't fancy, just a one-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, but it was mine. I had worked hard for it, saved carefully for the deposit, and took pride in every piece of furniture I'd bought, every picture I'd hung on the walls. It was a space where Rebecca's chaos couldn't touch me, where my parents' guilt trips had to come through a phone I could choose not to answer. I had learned the hard way that physical distance was the only way to maintain any kind of emotional boundary with my family, but even that sanctuary was constantly under threat. There were the surprise visits, my parents showing up with Rebecca in tow, just happening to be in the neighborhood. There were the hints about how much space I had, how lonely I must be living all by myself. There were the stories about other families, how supportive they were of each other, how they shared everything. The pressure was constant, like water wearing away at stone, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they made a more direct assault on my independence. The family dinner that changed everything started like so many others. My mother had called earlier in the week, her voice bright and cheerful as she insisted I come over for Sunday dinner. She missed me, she said. We hardly saw each other anymore. Couldn't I spare just a few hours for the family that loved me? The guilt was ladled on thick, and despite my better judgment, I agreed. I told myself it was just dinner. A few hours, I could handle that. I should have known something was up the moment I walked through the door. The house felt different, charged with an energy I couldn't quite place. My mother was bustling around the kitchen, humming to herself in that way she did when she was nervous about something. My father was in his usual chair, but he kept glancing at me and then away, like he couldn't quite meet my eyes. And Rebecca was already seated at the dining table, dressed nicer than I'd seen her in months. Her hands folded in her lap like a child waiting to be praised for good behavior. The small talk during dinner was stilted, forced. My mother asked about my job, nodding along as I talked about a recent project, but I could tell she wasn't really listening. My father contributed the occasional grunt of acknowledgement, pushing food around his plate more than eating it. Becca was uncharacteristically quiet, speaking only when spoken to, her usual dramatic flair notably absent. The tension in the room was palpable, and I found myself eating faster, eager to finish the meal and make my escape. I should have left right after the main course. Should have made some excuse about needing to get home, about having work to do. But my mother had made apple pie, my favorite, and she looked so hopeful as she brought it to the table that I found myself settling back in my chair, accepting a slice despite the knot of unease growing in my stomach. That was my mistake, giving them that extra time to spring their trap. It was as I was taking my last bite of pie that my mother finally revealed their hand. She set down her fork with deliberate precision, folded her hands on the table in front of her, and fixed me with that look that meant she was about to say something I wouldn't like. "Sarah, honey," she began, her voice taking on that overly sweet tone that always preceded bad news. "We need to talk to you about something important." The knot in my stomach tightened. I put down my own fork, preparing myself for whatever was coming. Around the table, I could feel everyone holding their breath, waiting for the axe to fall. My mother continued, her words coming out in a rush as if she was afraid I'd interrupt before she could get them all out. "Your sister is going through a really tough time right now. She lost her latest job through no fault of her own, and she's been staying here with us, but it's just not working out. Your father and I, we're not as young as we used to be, and having her here full-time is difficult for us." I knew where this was going. Could see the destination, even as my mother took the scenic route to get there. But I stayed silent, letting her dig the hole deeper with every word. "She needs stability, Sarah. She needs a chance to get back on her feet without the pressure of feeling like a burden. And you have that lovely apartment, all that space just for yourself. We thought, your father and I, that maybe Rebecca could stay with you for just a little while, just until she finds a new job and can afford her own place." There it was, the ask I'd been dreading for years. Not a request for money this time, not a co-signature or a reference, but an invasion of the one space I'd managed to keep separate from their dysfunction. I felt anger rise in my throat like bile, hot and bitter, but I swallowed it down. Years of practice had taught me that showing anger only gave them ammunition, only let them paint me as the unreasonable one. The selfish daughter who cared more about her personal space than her family. Rebecca finally spoke up, her voice small and hesitant in a way I knew was calculated to evoke sympathy. "It would only be for a few months, Sarah. I promise I wouldn't be any trouble. I could help with cleaning and cooking, pay for groceries once I get a job. Just need a chance to start over, and you're the only one who can help me." The manipulation was so transparent, it was almost insulting. The promises of help, of contribution, when we all knew Rebecca's track record. The claim that I was the only one who could help, designed to make me feel responsible for her fate. The time limit of a few months, which we all knew would stretch into eternity if I let it. I had heard it all before, had fallen for it too many times to count. But something had changed in me. Some final straw had been placed on the camel's back, and I could feel myself reaching a breaking point. My father cleared his throat, adding his voice to the chorus. "It's not like you can't afford it, Sarah. You're doing so well, and family helps family. That's what we do. Mother and I have supported both of you girls your whole lives. Now it's time for you to step up and help your sister." The hypocrisy of it burned. They had supported us, yes, but the support had never been equal. Where I had been pushed to be independent, to figure things out on my own, Rebecca had been coddled and enabled. Where I had been expected to work through college, to take on student loans that I was still paying off, Rebecca had been given chance after chance, excuse after excuse. But pointing that out would only lead to denials, to accusations that I was jealous, that I was keeping score in a way that family shouldn't. I looked around the table at their expectant faces. My mother, so certain that I would cave like I always had. My father, already mentally checking this problem off his list. And Rebecca, trying so hard to look pitiful and desperate, but unable to completely hide the smugness in her eyes. She thought she had won. They all did. They thought that I would react like I always had, with anger that they could deflect, with arguments they could counter, with reluctant agreement that they could celebrate. But I didn't give them any of that. Instead, I took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and nodded. Okay, I said simply, my voice calm and even. The surprise on their faces was almost comical. My mother blinked rapidly, as if trying to process my easy agreement. My father's eyebrows shot up toward his receding hairline. And Rebecca's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of triumph before she schooled her features back in a grateful humility. Really? My mother asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. You're okay with this? No arguments? No conditions? I shrugged, taking a sip of water to hide my smile. If it helps Rebecca get back on her feet, I don't see why not. Family helps family, right? The words tasted bitter in my mouth, but I forced them out with apparent sincerity. The change in atmosphere was immediate. The tension that had filled the room dissipated like smoke, replaced by a buzz of excited planning. My mother launched into a grateful speech about how proud she was of me, how she knew I would come through for the family. My father nodded approvingly, muttering something about how this was the right thing to do. And Rebecca began chattering about her plans, about how this fresh start was exactly what she needed, how grateful she was for the opportunity. I let them talk, nodding along and making appropriate noises of agreement. Inside, I was already several steps ahead, my mind working through the details of what was about to unfold. They had no idea what they had just set in motion, no clue that their carefully orchestrated manipulation had finally pushed me too far. I had played the dutiful daughter for the last time, had allowed myself to be guilted and pressured and used once too often. Now it was time for them to learn a lesson about assumptions and boundaries. When can she move in? I asked, injecting just the right amount of helpful concern into my voice. My mother practically glowed with satisfaction. We were thinking this weekend, if that works for you. That gives Rebecca a few days to pack her things and you time to prepare. This weekend, I repeated, nodding thoughtfully. Sure, that works. What time should I expect you? The planning continued, the details being hammered out with enthusiasm. Rebecca would bring her clothes and personal items. Not too much, she assured me, just enough to get by. My parents would help with the move, would make sure everything went smoothly. I agreed to everything, playing the part of the cooperative sister to perfection. Not once did I mention that I had already given notice on my apartment. Not once did I hint that I had been planning to move for weeks, that I had already signed a lease on a new place across town, that the apartment they were so eager to invade would be empty by the time they arrived with Rebecca's belongings. As I drove home that night, I felt a strange mixture of anticipation and sadness. Anticipation for what was coming, for the moment when their manipulation would finally blow up in their faces. But sadness, too, for the family we could have been if things had been different, if boundaries had been respected, if help had come without strings, if love hadn't been conditional on compliance. But that family existed only in my imagination, and it was time to stop pretending otherwise. The week passed in a blur of packing and preparation. Been planning this move for months, had saved carefully to afford the security deposit and first month's rent on a nicer place in a better neighborhood. It was a fresh start I had been craving, a chance to leave behind not just the physical space that held too many memories of family drama, but the mental space as well. Each box I packed felt like shedding a layer of obligation. Each piece of furniture I wrapped a step toward freedom. I didn't tell anyone about the move. Not my friends, who might accidentally mention it if they ran into my family. Not my coworkers, who might let it slip in casual conversation. And certainly not my family, who I avoided all week with carefully crafted excuses about being busy with work. The secret felt like a living thing inside me, growing larger with each passing day, and I found myself smiling at odd moments, imagining their faces when they discovered what I had done. By Friday night, the apartment was empty. The movers had come that afternoon, efficient and professional, loading my life into a truck and driving it across town to my new place. I stood in the empty living room, remembering all the times I had felt safe here, all the boundaries I had tried to maintain within these walls. Tomorrow, my family would arrive expecting to invade this space, to cross the last line I had drawn in the sand, but I wouldn't be here to see it. The thought filled me with a satisfaction so deep it was almost physical. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear. I woke up in my new bedroom, sunlight streaming through windows that faced east instead of north, and for a moment I just lay there, savoring the peace. My phone was already on silent, but I could see it lighting up with messages and missed calls. The family group chat was active, my mother sending reminders about the move, asking if I needed anything from the store, telling me how excited Rebecca was about this new chapter. I didn't respond. Instead, I made myself a cup of coffee in my new kitchen, arranged fresh flowers on my new dining table, and settled onto my new couch with a book I'd been meaning to read. The morning passed peacefully, interrupted only by the increasing frequency of phone calls I didn't answer. I could imagine the scene playing out across town, my family arriving at my old apartment building, arms full of Rebecca's possessions, ready to begin the invasion they'd so carefully planned. It was just after noon when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Sarah?" My mother's voice burst through the speaker, high and tight with barely controlled panic. "Where are you? What's going on?" "We're at your apartment, and the landlord says you moved out weeks ago. There's another tenant living here." The satisfaction I felt was immediate and overwhelming. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing as I responded. "Oh, that? Yeah, I moved. Didn't I mention it? Sorry, it's been such a busy few weeks with work and everything. Must have slipped my mind." The silence on the other end was deafening. I could hear my father's voice in the background, sharp and angry, demanding to know what was happening. Rebecca's voice joined the chorus, shrill with disbelief and growing panic. My mother struggled to form words. The careful control she usually maintained completely shattered. You moved and didn't tell us? Sarah, we're standing here with all of Rebecca's things. We planned this." "You agreed." I leaned back into my comfortable new couch, taking a sip of coffee before responding. "I know, and I'm really sorry about the miscommunication. I just assumed you knew. I mean, I've been planning this move for months. The opportunity came up, and I had to take it. You know how the rental market is these days? When you find a good place, you have to jump on it. This is unacceptable." My father had taken the phone now, his voice booming with the authority he'd always tried to wield over me. "You made a commitment to your sister, to your family. You can't just change your mind and leave us stranded like this." The anger in his voice was palpable, but underneath it, I could hear something else. Confusion, disbelief, the dawning realization that I wasn't playing by the rules anymore. "I didn't make any commitment, Dad," I said calmly. "I agreed that Rebecca could move in with me, and she can. It's just that I don't live there anymore. I'm sure you can understand that my housing situation is my own business. I'm an adult, after all. I make my own decisions about where I live. Your sister needs help," he sputtered, falling back on the familiar guilt trip. "Family helps family. You're being selfish and cruel." The words that might once have cut me to the quick now bounced off like rain on a windshield. Interesting, I mused aloud. When Rebecca couldn't keep a job, that wasn't selfish. When she couldn't pay her rent, that wasn't irresponsible. When you both decided to ambush me with this plan without even asking if it was okay, that wasn't cruel. But me living my own life, that's where you draw the line? The sound of Rebecca crying in the background was theatrical, designed to evoke sympathy. I could hear my mother trying to comfort her while simultaneously grabbing the phone back from my father. "Sarah, please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Where are you living now? We can bring Rebecca's things there. This doesn't have to be a disaster. We can work this out." The assumption that I would give in, that I would provide my new address and allow the invasion to proceed as planned, was so typical it almost made me laugh. "No," I said simply. "No, you can't bring her things here. This is my home, my space, and I decide who's welcome in it. Rebecca's not. Not now, not ever. She's 32 years old, Mom. It's time she figured out her own life without using mine as a safety net." "How can you be so heartless?" My mother's voice had shifted from pleading to accusatory. "After everything we've done for you, after all the love and support we've given you, and this is how you repay us? By abandoning your sister in her time of need? By lying to us and manipulating us?" The irony of being accused of manipulation by the people who had spent years guilt-tripping and pressuring me was not lost. I found myself laughing, a short, sharp sound that seemed to shock them into silence. "You want to talk about manipulation? Let's talk about every phone call that started with how proud you were of me before sliding into what Rebecca needed. Let's talk about every family gathering where I was cornered and pressured into helping just this once. Let's talk. What do you guilt about? This is ridiculous, Sarah. You've made your point. Now tell us where you live so we can sort this out like adults. But that was exactly what I was doing, sorting it out like an adult. Like an adult who had finally learned that no is a complete sentence, that boundaries are not suggestions, that family doesn't mean doormat. I'd suggest going back home, I said evenly. Rebecca's been living with you for months already. What's a few more? Or better yet, maybe it's time for her to figure out her own solution. There are shelters, assistance programs, job placement services, resources for people who actually want to help themselves instead of relying on others. The silence that followed was heavy with disbelief. They had never heard me speak like this, had never imagined I was capable of such firm boundaries. In their minds, I was still the dutiful daughter, the responsible sister, the one who could always be counted on to cave eventually. The realization that I had changed, that I had finally reached my limit, was hitting them like a physical blow. "We're coming to find you," my mother said finally, her voice hard with determination. "We'll figure out where you live and we'll come there. You can't just cut us off like this, Sarah. We're your family." The threat was meant to scare me, to make me capitulate out of fear of confrontation. But I had anticipated this too, had chosen my new apartment building specifically for its security features. Its controlled access, its strict policies about visitors. "You can try," I said calmly, "but you won't be welcome. And if you show up anyway, if you try to force your way into my life after I've explicitly told you not to, I'll have no choice but to involve the authorities." Trespassing is a crime, even when it's family doing it, especially when it's family that refuses to respect boundaries. The sharp intake of breath on the other end told me my words had hit their mark. The threat of legal consequences, of public embarrassment, of having their family drama exposed to strangers was something they hadn't considered. In their world, family disputes stayed within the family, were resolved through guilt and manipulation and wearing down the opposition. The idea that I might actually follow through on calling the police was foreign to them. "You wouldn't dare," Rebecca hissed, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "You wouldn't call the cops on your own family? What would people think? What would they say about you, turning your back on your sister like this?" The concern about appearances, about what others might think, was so typical of her. It had always been more important to look like a functional family than to actually be one. "I don't care what people think," I replied honestly. "I care about my peace of mind. I care about my mental health. I care about not being used anymore. And if that makes me the villain in your story, so be it. At least I'll be a villain with boundaries, with self-respect, with a life that isn't constantly derailed by other people's poor choices." The conversation continued for a few more minutes, but it was clear we had reached an impasse. They couldn't understand my position, couldn't fathom how I had broken free from the role they had assigned me. And I couldn't make them understand, couldn't bridge the gap between their expectations and my reality. Eventually, I ended the call, cutting off my mother mid-sentence as she launched into yet another guilt trip about family loyalty. The silence that followed was profound. I sat in my new living room, surrounded by boxes I had yet to unpack, and waited for the guilt to hit. For the second thoughts, the regrets, the urge to call back and apologize. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years when it came to my family. Relief. Pure overwhelming relief that I had finally stood up for myself, had finally chosen my own well-being over their convenience. My phone continued to blow up with calls and messages for the rest of the day. I didn't answer any of them, but I did glance at the texts, watching the progression from anger to bargaining to threats and back to anger again. Rebecca's messages were particularly venomous, filled with accusations and name-calling that only reinforced my decision. My mother's were more subtle, alternating between disappointment and attempts to make me feel guilty about their wasted trip, about the embarrassment of standing outside my old apartment with all of Rebecca's belongings. By evening, the messages had taken a different turn. They had figured out, probably through social media or mutual acquaintances, the general area where I had moved. The threats to find me became more specific, more determined. I knew it was only a matter of time before they showed up, before this confrontation moved from phone calls to face-to-face conflict. But I was ready for that too. Sunday came with an eerie quiet. The messages had stopped sometime during the night, which worried me more than the constant barrage had. I spent the morning organizing my new space, trying to create some sense of normalcy despite the situation. Every car that passed made me tense. Every footstep in the hallway made me freeze. The waiting was almost worse than dealing with their anger directly. It was late afternoon when the inevitable happened. The intercom buzzed and I heard the security guard's voice. "Miss Thompson, there are some people here claiming to be your family. They're quite insistent about seeing you. Should I send them up?" The moment of truth had arrived. I took a deep breath, steadied my voice, and made my choice. "No," I replied clearly. "They're not welcome here. Please ask them to leave. If they refuse, call the police. I've been dealing with harassment from them and I don't feel safe." The security guard, bless him, didn't question my response. "Of course, Miss Thompson. I'll handle it right away." Through my window, I could see the front of the building, could watch as my family was turned away. Even from several floors up, I could see my father's angry gestures, my mother's pleading posture, Rebecca's dramatic flailing. But the security guard stood firm, and after several minutes of argument, they had no choice but to retreat. But they didn't give up. For the next hour, they tried everything they could think of. They waited outside, hoping to catch me coming or going. They tried to slip in behind other residents, only to be stopped by the vigilant security staff. They called the intercom repeatedly until the guard stopped answering. Finally, in desperation, they began causing a scene on the sidewalk, their voices raised loud enough that I could hear them even from my apartment. That's when I made the call I had been dreading, but knew was necessary. "Hello, I'd like to report a disturbance," I said when the 911 operator answered. "My estranged family is outside my building, refusing to leave after being asked multiple times. They're causing a scene, and I'm concerned for my safety." I gave the details calmly and clearly, years of dealing with their drama having taught me the importance of staying composed. The police arrived within minutes, their presence immediately changing the dynamic on the street below. I watched from my window as officers approached my family, as the conversation shifted from demands and threats to explanations and excuses. I could see my mother gesturing wildly, no doubt spinning some story about family miscommunication, about a daughter who had lost her way. But the officers remained professional, clearly more interested in resolving the situation than taking sides in a family dispute. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 15 or 20 minutes, I saw my family being escorted away from the building. They weren't arrested, just firmly encouraged to leave and not return. The defeat in their posture was evident even from my elevated viewpoint. Rebecca was crying again, but this time the tears seemed genuine, born of frustration and the dawning realization that her safety net had well and truly been cut. My phone rang minutes later. The officer wanted to speak with me, to get my side of the story, and discuss options for keeping my family away if they continued to be a problem. I explained the situation as succinctly as possible: the years of financial exploitation, the attempted manipulation, the refusal to respect my boundaries. The officer listened without judgment, taking notes and offering resources for dealing with family harassment. He assured me that if they returned, if they continued to bother me, I could pursue a restraining order. The idea of taking legal action against my own family should have been unthinkable. A year ago, even 6 months ago, I would have been horrified at this suggestion. But now it just seemed like the logical next step if they couldn't respect my boundaries. The officer gave me his card, told me to call if there were any more problems, and wished me well. The kindness in his voice, the validation that my concerns were legitimate, meant more than he could have known. The rest of the evening passed in a strange calm. My phone had finally gone quiet, the flood of messages and calls stopping abruptly after the police intervention. I unpacked a few more boxes, cooked myself a simple dinner, and tried to process everything that had happened. The family I had known, the dynamics I had accepted for so long, were officially over. There was no going back from this, no pretending that things could return to normal after such a decisive break. But as I lay in bed that night in my new home, surrounded by the peace and quiet I had fought so hard to achieve, I realized I didn't want to go back. The price of keeping the peace had been too high, had cost me too much of myself. The guilt they had used as a weapon for so long had lost its power, replaced by a sense of rightness, of finally being true to myself and my needs. Days turned into weeks, and the silence from my family continued. At first, I expected them to regroup, to come back with some new strategy for breaking down my defenses. But as time passed with no contact, I began to realize that perhaps this was it. Perhaps being met with actual consequences, with boundaries enforced by law enforcement, had finally gotten through to them in a way my words never could. I heard through the grapevine, mutual acquaintances who couldn't resist sharing gossip, that Rebecca had indeed remained with my parents, that the three of them had formed an even tighter unit, united in their victimhood, in their disbelief that I had actually cut them off. I heard that Rebecca was still unemployed, still making excuses, still being enabled by parents who couldn't see the pattern they were perpetuating. But it wasn't my problem anymore. For the first time in my adult life, Rebecca's failures and my parents' enabling were completely separate from my life. The freedom was intoxicating. I threw myself into my work, excelling without the constant distraction of family drama. I deepened friendships that had been neglected while I was caught up in the cycle of guilt and obligation. I started therapy, working through years of conditioning that had made me believe I was responsible for everyone else's happiness at the expense of my own. I dated without the fear of introducing someone to my dysfunctional family, without the embarrassment of explaining why my sister might call at 2 in the morning needing money. 6 months passed before I heard from any of them again. Letter came on a Tuesday, my mother's familiar handwriting on the envelope making my heart skip a beat. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won out. Inside was a lengthy missive, pages of my mother's careful script detailing how hurt they all were, how confused by my behavior, how desperate to understand what they had done to deserve such treatment. It was a masterclass in manipulation, hitting every emotional button she knew I had. But those buttons had been disconnected, the wiring rerouted to protect my peace. She wrote about Rebecca's continued struggles, about how hard it had been for them to support her alone, about how much they missed having my help. She wrote about family traditions I was missing, about relatives asking where I was, about the hole my absence had left in their lives. She even included pictures, snapshots of family gatherings where my absence was presumably felt, though everyone in the photos looked happy enough without me. But buried in all the guilt and manipulation was something else, a tiny acknowledgement that perhaps they had relied on me too heavily, that perhaps they hadn't been entirely fair in their expectations. It wasn't an apology, not really, more like a testing of the waters to see if this small concession might be enough to bring me back into the fold. It wasn't. I didn't respond to the letter. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said, no words that could bridge the gap between their need to have me as their safety net and my need to live my own life. I filed it away with other important documents, evidence if I ever needed it, but otherwise tried to put it out of my mind. 4 months passed, a full year since the incident at the apartment, and I had built a life completely separate from them. The guilt that had once been my constant companion had faded to an occasional whisper, easily silenced by reminding myself of all the times they had put their convenience above my well-being. I was happy in a way I hadn't known was possible, free from the constant anxiety of waiting for the next crisis, the next request for help, the next guilt trip. Then, one day, I ran into a cousin at the grocery store. She looked uncomfortable seeing me, shifting her weight and glancing around as if looking for an escape route. But she stopped to talk, and what she told me was illuminating. Rebecca had finally hit rock bottom. Without me to cushion her falls, she had been forced to face actual consequences for her choices. She had been evicted from my parents' house after a particularly bad fight about her refusal to contribute, had spent some time in a shelter, and had finally gotten a job that she had managed to keep for several months. My parents, according to my cousin, were exhausted. The full weight of Rebecca's dependence had fallen on them, and they were struggling with the burden they had once been so happy to shift onto me. There had been talk of selling their house, of downsizing to something more manageable, of finally setting some boundaries with Rebecca. It seemed that my absence had forced them all to grow in ways they never would have if I had remained in my assigned role. I felt a complicated mix of emotions hearing this. Vindication that my decision had been right. Sadness that it had taken such drastic measures to create change. A tiny spark of hope that maybe someday we could have a relationship based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. But mostly I felt relief that I had stuck to my boundaries, that I hadn't caved to the pressure and manipulation. As I write this now, 2 years have passed since that fateful dinner. I've had no direct contact with my family in all that time, though I occasionally hear updates through the family grapevine. Rebecca is still working, though she struggles. My parents are learning, slowly and painfully, to let her face her own consequences. And me? I'm thriving in ways I never imagined possible when I was caught in their web of guilt and obligation. I share this story not because I'm proud of cutting off my family, but because I know there are others out there who are trapped in similar dynamics, who are told that family means accepting treatment you would never tolerate from friends or strangers, who are made to feel guilty for having boundaries, for protecting their own well-being, for refusing to be the eternal safety net for people who refuse to help themselves. If that's you, if you're reading this and seeing echoes of your own family in mine, I want you to know that it's okay to choose yourself. It's okay to say no, to set boundaries, to refuse to be manipulated. It doesn't make you a bad person or a bad family member. It makes you someone who values their own mental health and well being. And despite what they might tell you, that's not selfish, it's necessary. The path I chose was extreme, and it's not the right choice for everyone. But for me, it was the only way to break free from a cycle that was destroying my peace of mind and limiting my life. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their destructive behaviors. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from people who only see you as a resource to be exploited. Family is important, but it's not more important than your mental health, your financial security, or your right to live your life on your own terms. Blood relation doesn't give anyone the right to manipulate, guilt, or exploit you. And choosing to protect yourself from those things, even when the people doing them are family, is not just acceptable, it's admirable. I don't know if I'll ever reconcile with my family. The door isn't completely closed, but it would take genuine acknowledgement of their behavior and real changes for me to even consider reopening communication. They would need to demonstrate that they can respect my boundaries, that they see me as a person rather than a safety net, that they're willing to have a relationship that isn't based on what they can get from me. Maybe that day will come, maybe it won't. Either way, I'm at peace with my decision. I've built a life filled with people who respect me, with relationships based on mutual support rather than one-sided exploitation. I've learned that family isn't just about blood, it's about how people treat you. And I've learned that sometimes the most important person you need to protect yourself from is the one who shares your DNA. To those who've walked this path before me, thank you for showing that it's possible to break free. To those still trapped in toxic family dynamics, know that you deserve better. And to my family, if they ever read this, know that I loved you enough to stop enabling behaviors that were hurting all of us. Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes it means choosing yourself. And sometimes it means finally saying no and meaning it.